What would you do if your stolen children returned as strangers? After 20 years in a radical survivalist cult, Sarah and Jessica are home, but the tape they brought with them reveals their father's final, terrifying act. For 20 years, it was the knock on the door Maria both prayed for and feared. The day it finally happened, it broke a 2-decade silence with a sound that was quiet, hesitant, and then firm. For 7,300 days, Maria's life had been in a state of suspended agony, ever since her 5-year-old twin daughters, Sarah and Jessica, vanished. The 2 women standing on her porch now were ghosts from a stolen life. Her daughters, taken by their own father, were finally home. But they weren't alone. In their hands, they held an old, worn-out VHS tape, and that tape was about to prove that everything Maria thought she knew about the last 20 years was a lie. To understand the reunion, you have to go back to the moment it all fell apart. It was the summer of 2006. Maria and her husband Michael were in the middle of a nasty divorce. Michael, who was once a charismatic and loving dad, had changed. He'd become paranoid, constantly spouting dark warnings about the government and the collapse of society. He kept talking about going off-grid to protect his family from a world he saw as corrupt. Maria thought he was being dangerous. Michael believed it was his duty. The custody battle was brutal, and Maria was awarded full custody. Michael didn't see it as a court's decision. He saw it as a declaration of war. The court gave him one last weekend visit before the order went into effect. He was supposed to bring Sarah and Jessica back on Sunday evening. Maria made their favorite dinner. But as the sun went down, Michael's car never came up the driveway. Panic set in. Her frantic calls went to a phone that was no longer in service. His apartment was completely empty. The furniture was gone, his bank accounts were drained, and Michael, along with their 2 little girls, had vanished into thin air. The police launched a massive investigation, driven by a mother's desperate pleas. The case of the missing twins became a local tragedy, their smiling faces plastered on news reports and posters that slowly faded over time. But Michael was smart. He left no trail, no digital footprint, not a single whisper of where he'd taken them. The case didn't just go cold, it froze over with each passing year.
For 2 decades, Maria never stopped searching, fueled by a mother's stubborn hope. She refused to move out of their family home and wouldn't even change the girls' bedroom. The twin beds were still there, pink comforters perfectly folded, like a time capsule of a childhood that had been put on pause. The walls were still covered in their crayon drawings of smiling sons and stick-figure families, a heartbreaking reminder of the family he had shattered. Years blurred into a decade, and then 2. Maria chased down every possible lead, no matter how small. She talked to psychics who gave her nothing but empty words, and private investigators who could only offer apologies. She learned to live with the constant, dull ache of her missing children. Friends and family gently told her to move on, to accept the unthinkable. But how could she? How can a mother ever give up on her own children? The world kept going, but Maria's was stuck on that summer evening in 2006. In town, she became a kind of living ghost, a walking memorial to unresolved grief. Her vigil was her silent, stubborn promise that she would never let the memory of her daughters fade, even as the hope for their return burned down to a flicker. Would you keep a room exactly the same for 20 years? Imagine the agonizing pain of a mother waiting 2 decades for a knock on the door. True crime stories like Maria's show the terrifying reality of parental abduction and the psychological toll of unresolved grief. Drop a comment below. Do you think you could hold on to hope for this long? The pain of not knowing is an agony no parent should ever have to experience. Maria's refusal to give up after 2 decades of silence shows just how powerful a mother's love can be. If you believe that hope can shine in the darkest of times, take a second to subscribe and join our community so you never miss the resolution to stories like this one. Don't miss how this shocking mystery ends. We dig deep into real-life survival stories and cold cases that baffled the FBI. If you love deep dive true crime documentaries, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a twist. And then, the knock. When Maria opened the door, she wasn't looking at the 5-year-olds from her memories. She was looking at two 25-year-old women. Their faces were thinner and carried a hardness she didn't recognize. But their eyes were the same. It was Sarah and Jessica. They just stood there on the porch, stiff and awkward, looking both terrified and deeply exhausted. The reunion wasn't some happy movie scene. It was quiet, fragile, and totally surreal. Tears poured down Maria's face as she pulled them into a hug, which they hesitantly returned. They felt like strangers. They spoke in quiet, careful voices. Their vocabulary was small, and it was obvious their knowledge of the outside world was practically zero. They carried the heavy weight of a life lived in the shadows, a life Maria couldn't even start to imagine. As they stepped inside the home they couldn't remember, Jessica, who seemed to be the bolder of the two, held up the object they'd been holding. A dusty black VHS tape. "He said you should see this," she whispered. "He said it was his insurance policy." What would you do if your missing children walked up to your door 20 years later, holding a mysterious VHS tape? This isn't a movie plot. It's a terrifying look into extreme isolation and survival. What do you think was on that tape? Let's talk in the comments. In the living room, which had become a shrine to her lost children, Maria found an old VCR. The three of them sat on the couch, separated by a 20-year canyon of time, and pressed play. The screen flickered on. The man who appeared was a ghost too. It was Michael, but he looked nothing like the man Maria remembered. He was thin, and his eyes were wild with a terror that went way beyond his old paranoia. He wasn't in some cozy room. He was in what looked like a damp, concrete bunker. The date stamp in the corner read 2018. The video was 8 years old. His voice was a raw, broken whisper. He started by confessing to taking the girls, but this wasn't just a story about a father on the run. This was so much worse. Michael confessed that he hadn't just run away, he had run to something. He'd used his anti-government paranoia to get into a shadowy, extremist survivalist network. This wasn't just a few guys playing soldier in the woods. It was a sophisticated, multi-state organization that gave its members new identities, off-grid shelter, and total secrecy. He thought they were protectors. He was wrong. They were jailers. The tape was his confession, but it was also a desperate plea. The network wasn't a safe haven. It was a cult. They didn't just want to hide from the world. They wanted to burn it down. Michael had become a prisoner of his own beliefs, and he'd trapped his daughters right there with him. He explained he was making the tape because he was afraid the network had turned on him for questioning their leader. He knew he was a dead man. He described hiding the tape in a false bottom of the girls' old wooden toy chest, which he'd taken with them. It was his last-ditch effort to save them. The tape was his insurance policy, not for him, but for them. It was filled with names, locations, and details about the network's crimes. At the end of the tape, he looked right into the camera, his eyes meeting Maria's across the years. "Get them out, Maria," he rasped. "Forgive me, and get them out." Then the screen went to static. The terrifying reality of underground extremist cults. Michael thought he was protecting his family from the government, but he handed them over to a dangerous, multi-state criminal syndicate. This dark turn highlights the dangers of radicalization and conspiracy theories. Have you ever heard of a cold case involving survivalist networks? Let's discuss below. The silence in the room was crushing. The tape wasn't just a confession, it was a map out of hell. That VHS tape was handed over to the FBI. The information Michael recorded was a bombshell that led to a series of raids across several states. Thanks to a dead man's final words, a criminal network that had operated in the shadows for decades was dismantled from the inside out. For Sarah and Jessica, coming home was just the first step on a much longer journey. 20 years of isolation and indoctrination left deep scars. Together with their mother, they began the slow, painful process of healing, of deprogramming, and of learning about a world they were taught to fear. Maria got her daughters back, but the little girls she lost were gone forever. In their place stood two resilient young women who had survived the unimaginable and now had to learn how to truly live, not just survive. This story is a harrowing look at the devastating consequences of extremism, but it's also a testament to a mother's undying love. It does leave you with a lingering question, though. Michael started this whole tragedy, destroying his own life and so many others. Can one good deed at the end of a life make up for a lifetime of bad ones? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if this story moved you, please consider liking and sharing. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important stories are the ones that have been kept silent for far too long. Can redemption truly exist after committing an unforgivable crime? Michael stole his daughters' lives for 20 years, but his final tape brought down an entire multi-state cult network. This survival story forces us to look at the gray areas of human nature and psychological recovery. What do you think? Does his final act bring justice? Leave your thoughts below, share this video with a true crime fan, and subscribe for more deep dives.